I'm spending 24 hours inside Kamoshida's castle. Will I make it out alive? Will I be able to fight against those nasty shadows? Subscribe and watch till the end to find out. Oh, damn it. Persona 5 Palaces. One of the most iconic and memorable parts to come out of P5 specifically. Uniquely made dungeons with its own puzzles and storyline to follow, what else needs to be said? The palaces in Persona 5 have always been a very fascinating point of discussion, from tier lists to their soundtracks to even potential ideas for new palaces. Now this is fancy and all, but I'm tired of living in the city. I want to explore some new horizons and move somewhere far from what I'm used to. So that's why I'm choosing to live in a Persona 5 palace. That's right, I'll be going on a journey to rank all of the Persona 5 palaces based on how their living conditions would be in real life. Rating from 1 to 10, 10 being I would easily move there, to 1 being an absolute mistake, and might I even say, deadly. We're taking into consideration things like the location, amenities, surroundings, and just the overall environment of the palace. This is all going to be based on from what we've seen both in-game and cutscenes, by the way. Since we're rating these palaces from how they would exist in real life, there won't be any demons or palace rulers running around either. For this ranking, we're including all of the main palaces featured in Persona 5 alongside Maruki's from Royal. With all that out of the way, I'll grab my bags and open the Metaverse app, cause this is our ranking of the Persona 5 palaces by how livable they are. And as always, before we start, I just want to say that if you're enjoying our productions, or you want to see more Persona-related stuff from us, please be sure to press that subscribe button. And while you're at it, be sure to check out any of our other platforms if you haven't already. And with all that out of the way, let's get started. Yikes! So this is where we're starting, huh? Brace yourselves, because this might be one of the most controversial things I've ever said. Kamoshida's castle isn't that bad of a place to stay in. I know, sounds insane, but hear me out. It's creepy, and the less being said about this guy, the better. But if we're strictly talking about the palace itself, well, it has potential. Let's start with the obvious. It's a castle. The first few areas are very fancy with the kind of interior you'd see in a place like this. Dining area, a fully stocked kitchen, and plenty of food to go around. Then there's the interior design. It's all very elegant with the use of carpets, candles as your main source of lighting, high ceilings, chandeliers, pretty impressive stuff. There's also plenty of rooms, and while they might not be designated bedrooms, you've got these couches scattered across the hallways. Who knows? With a little redecorating, you could turn one of these empty spaces into a good place to sleep. Now, it's not all perfect. Like all of these palaces, it does have its downsides. First off, let's talk about the dungeons. I don't know about you, but the idea of living above these jail cells isn't exactly comforting. And then you've got the moving platforms. Seriously, how am I supposed to get anywhere without accidentally falling into the void? The architecture ranges from pretty fancy to a literal disaster waiting to happen. I don't know, I just feel like at any moment parts of the castle quite literally collapse if not maintained well enough. And can we talk about the hidden rooms and the creepy symbolism scattered everywhere? The whole castle gives off this feeling like it's watching you. The statues, the paintings, and the overall aura of the place is enough to drive someone away from here. Still, if I'm being honest, there's something oddly livable about it. Sure, it's got its issues, but in terms of its amenities, there's plenty of space, food, and some solid medieval charm. It's not ideal, but if I had no other choice, I think I could make it work for at least a year. Alright, moving on to the next palace, Madarame's. And let me tell you, this one is far different from what we just covered. One thing that I noticed very early on is just how niche the overall setting is. As you can see, Madarame's palace takes the form of a museum. This in itself is both good, but mostly bad. But let's start with the positives, shall we? First off, the aesthetic here is amazing, if not some of the best in our list. Since this palace is meant to be designed after a museum, this leaves us with beautiful scenery, a fancy garden, big rooms to stay in, and a very nice view from the rooftop. It's all very nice stuff. Plus, like Kamoshida's castle, these couches wouldn't make a terrible place to sleep in. Bonus points for the security system here. Not only does it help make this place feel a lot safer, but they also have a few laptops lying around, so at least I'll have something to do while I'm here. You might be wondering then, what's stopping this place from being the perfect home? Well, the problem here is, museums aren't exactly designed with people living in them in mind. Aside from the gorgeous scenery, there's not much you can really use to properly live here. Most of the palace is made up of large art galleries, security control rooms, and whatever you can call this. Seriously, I know these palaces are meant to have some sort of abstract interior, but I do not want to imagine what would happen if you trip and fall down there. The overall vibe of the palace isn't as bad as Kamoshida's, but it can be somewhat unsettling with the statues, and some paintings can look a bit creepy. In terms of food, there's what appears to be vending machines, which is fine, but let's be real, this won't last you for long. Hey, at least there's bathrooms, so you got some hygiene and a water system inside the place. As a whole, this palace is pretty okay if you're just staying over for a vacation. As beautiful as the scenery and the different art you can find is, there's not a lot that's available in order to fully move here. For that reason, at most, I can see myself lasting a week, and that's being generous. Next up on our list, Kaneshiro's Palace, aka, that giant UFO bank in the sky. So let me start by saying this. Even though there's a clear city with Shibuya in the background, I'll be focusing more on the main palace itself. The same rule is going to apply to all the palaces with a similar setting, so that includes Sai and Maruki's palaces as well. As for the main location, however, remember how I said that Madarame's palace was very niche with its setting? Well, yeah, this one basically holds that same issue, but 10 times worse. There's quite literally nothing to do here. Makes sense since it's a bank, and there are these chairs I can use to sleep in, but what else is there to work with? There's no food, there isn't even vending machines. Most of the rooms are either the interior of an average bank or just that giant maze that is the safe room. You could say the security is one of the best parts of this palace. That and the fact that this thing is always in the sky just means it's near impossible for your average Joe to break in. Same goes with the scenery. You can't deny that having a view of the city like this is always a great thing to have. Just be careful from falling from there since there's no railing as far as I'm aware. This palace is livable. Of all the palaces, there's one thing that makes this one stand out among the rest. That being this one town in the distance. Even though I stated that we can't use locations outside the main palace, the desert is the palace, meaning everything like the town to this hub area to the pyramid is here for us to explore. Plus, keep in mind that we do in fact have to interfere with that specific town in order to progress for our main objective, meaning Futaba herself recognizes and most likely knows what's available for us in that area, which I got to say, there's a lot we can work with. There's baskets filled with fruits, enough soil to plant some crops, the buildings seem to have air conditioners, so it's very helpful to deal with the heat in this palace. That's not even mentioning how big the overall area is. Seriously, this town is surprisingly very big and could hold a good amount of people. While water may be a concern, you could pretty much boil the water found in this pond to make it safe to drink. This might actually be one of the few palaces that, theoretically speaking, could have a proper civilization function within it. This alone already makes Futaba's palace one of the most unique and most advanced in terms of the living conditions. While yes, the past palaces do have an overall better setting for the average person, Futaba has way more tools for survivability. Though, like all the previous palaces, it's not perfect. The pyramid itself is littered with deadly traps, bottomless pits, quicksand, and boulders that can crush you in a matter of seconds. If I didn't include that town in the distance, this would easily be one of the deadliest places in the entire game. That's not even mentioning the fact that we're in a literal desert in the middle of nowhere. If we're basing this place off the Sahara, the temperatures will be through the roof. Not to mention you'd have practically zero communication to any outside source, and who knows how long those fruits can last you. It's only bound to go downhill one way or another. Despite all these major challenges, if someone or multiple people can manage and use their given resources to their fullest potential, you could in fact be able to survive for quite a good while. Heck, if all goes really well, I'd argue you can live here for a long time. Is it perfect? Not by a mile. Will it require a lot more work to get this place to function? Yes. But based on my research, I'm confident in saying that Futaba's palace is one of the few that I'd be okay with moving to. Nobody should have to live here. For real this time. While yes, Futaba's is on paper the deadliest palace of all, it still offers plenty to withstand those conditions. On the other hand, Okumura's palace not only has a pretty dangerous setting, but it doesn't give you anything to work with. Let's start with the elephant in the room. You're literally in space! Sure, there's nothing wrong with sending people outside of Earth, but you've got to keep in mind, you won't be provided with a spacesuit. And I don't know about you, but last time I checked, you kind of need one. This is the same palace that has the Phantom Thieves travel by going outside of the space station. Simply being exposed to these areas of the palace without the proper equipment is enough to make this one of the deadliest places on the whole list. Maybe you could argue that these storage rooms hold food, water, and possibly the proper equipment to live, but considering the main staff are overworked robots, chances are slim to none. The only thing stopping it from being deadly tier is at least you're inside a proper space station.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it.
Moving on to Sai's Palace, this place is decent. We're already located around a city too, so that's already giving it a lot of bonus points. However, it does fall into the same trap we've seen with Madarame and Kaneshiro's places. That is being its niche setting. For those who don't know, Sai's Palace is based around a typical casino. You have different sorts of games, the back rooms, and that's about it. Even though this is regarded as one of the best palaces in the game, there's not a whole lot to work with in terms of living. I will admit the overall aesthetic is really nice and fancy. The security rooms do offer a bit of food, and these chairs do seem pretty good for sleeping, but that's the most we get out of this palace. And even then, why would you want to live in a casino in the first place? Endless lights, sounds, and I can't imagine the smell of this place being any more pleasant either. Am I being too harsh? Maybe. At most, I will say that if you do live and theoretically speaking own the casino, you could actually make a profit simply from having the facility open to the public. That's not really a factor that helps its case, but it's pretty fun to think about. Whatever the case is, just like most of the earlier palaces, it's definitely not the worst, but I can only see myself staying here for about a week at most. You know, I'm just realizing something. I know there's no sense of time when it comes to the palaces, but I see it really interesting how this is one of two palaces that don't have it set to nighttime. But anyway, let's move on to Shido's palace. I can't believe I'm saying this, but this might be one of the best palaces in the whole list. You have some very nice looking rooms, a dedicated restaurant, a casino area, and just all around a very fancy and rich interior to go around. Of course, there likely won't be any staff, but think of the things you can do if you own one. Cruises are very luxurious and could go for hundreds of millions of dollars. Heck, you could probably rent rooms out for other people to stay in. Shido's palace is essentially one of the few palaces that not only have the best living conditions, but you can get a financial gain from it. I don't know what else needs to be said other than I would be more than happy to move to Shido's palace. Though, less said about seasickness the better. I forgot I had to talk about this one. Properly explaining how mementos would even work in the real world is quite a challenge on its own, mainly by how unique it is compared to everything we've seen up to this point. I like to think that this palace would operate sort of like a channel of underground tunnels. Though, even going by that logic, I'm questioning how anyone would want to live in a place like Mementos. You have bottomless pits, the creepy atmosphere, zero proper shelter, you name it. I guess you could live in the distorted version of Shibuya shown here. I wouldn't recommend it, but at least you have the city, so there's gotta be some materials that could help you survive. Whatever the case is, let's just move on and put this in the deadliest of all the places. Let's see how this last one holds up. We finally made it. Maruki's Palace. Is this place somewhat livable? Or is it even deadlier than Mementos? Well, I can already tell you it isn't that, that's for sure. For starters, we have another city, making this the third palace to have one. As for the palace itself, it's quite an interesting one, and admittedly took me the longest to properly find a good placement for it. Maruki's Palace is very reminiscent of a typical research facility, but I'd even go as far as to say it's a hospital. This almost felt like we could fall to the whole niche problem about half of the palaces are in, but that's far from the truth. The overall interior design is very well made. There's the modern and clean lounges, a stadium, that's not even mentioning the more abstract locations in here. Of all the palaces, this one has probably the most things going for it, but how does it compare in its living conditions? Well, I could definitely see it working. There's several small rooms meant to play as an office, but you could definitely turn them into a bedroom if you desired. There's couches and several chairs spread across the palace, so that's a good way to have a bed. Also, may I add that there's a literal garden in here? You've got trees, tons of flowers, and admittedly it's a very good looking place to check out. Maruki's Palace is overall very reminiscent of what we've seen from Kamoshida's, where it starts off with a realistic setting to then get weirder as you get yourself deeper into it. I'd say this is one of the few times I can accept this. Mostly. I'd be lying if I said I didn't like the counseling room. It's unsettling. Especially with those electric gates just sitting there. That's not even mentioning this one area where you go up flights of stairs with their corresponding colors. I don't know about you, but that's just another void for you to fall in. Whatever the case is, I'd argue that this is a pretty overall decent palace. Definitely not the best, but you can probably work with what's being offered in here. Plus, like most other palaces, it's also located in a city, so bonus points on that. If I had to be honest, I'd be okay with spending a vacation here for the garden alone. For that, I'd probably spend at least a week here. And I think that's about it. That's all of the Persona 5 palaces ranked based on how livable they are. Here's my final tier list ranking them all in their respective place. Making this production was really fun, to be honest. Seeing all these details the developers added to make each palace stand out really goes to show how much work they put into these games. Who knows, maybe I'll do a sequel, but with the rest of the cognitive world seen in spin-offs. But what do you think about this list? Is there any palace you'd be able to stay longer? Let us know in the comments below. Now, if you excuse me, I have a new production to work on. Guess I gotta go fast for it, huh? Yeah, not my best one.